The morning they came back from Spain, the key didn't work. They thought the lock was jammed. They didn't know their daughter, the so-called burden, had sold the house while they were busy sipping sangria and planning my financial extinction. Surprise, Dad, the burden lifted herself. My name is Rachel Whitmore, and this is the story of how I finally freed myself from parents who saw me not as a daughter, but as a financial safety net they could pull whenever they needed cushioning from their own poor decisions. I grew up in Brooklinshire, a working-class suburb where everyone knew everyone else's business and where dreams bigger than a steady factory job were considered putting on airs. My father, Walter Whitmore, worked construction until his back gave out, and my mother, Helen, answered phones at the local dentist's office until she decided that working was beneath her newfound aspirations for the finer things in life. From the beginning, I was different from what they wanted, where they saw a future secretary, or maybe a nurse if I was lucky. I saw buildings rising from blueprints, spaces transformed by light and shadow. I spent hours sketching floor plans in the margins of my school notebooks, designing dream homes while my mother complained about the real one we lived in. "You're too much in your head," my father would say, finding me hunched over my drawings. "No man wants a woman who thinks she's smarter than him." "She gets it from your mother," my mother would add, as if my creativity was a genetic defect passed down from Grandma Marjorie like a hereditary disease. But Grandma Marjorie was the only one who understood, a retired art teacher with paint-stained fingers and eyes that saw beauty where others saw waste. She would slip me architecture books from the library and teach me about perspective and proportion while my parents watched game shows in the next room. "You have a gift, Rachel," she'd whisper, adjusting my grip on the pencil. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." When I was accepted into the architecture program at State University, my parents' reaction was less than enthusiastic. "Who's paying for this nonsense?" my father demanded, crumpling the acceptance letter like it was a bill we couldn't afford. "I am," Grandma Marjorie said quietly from the doorway. "Every penny." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went through several shades of red before settling on a mottled purple that matched the throw pillows she'd bought on credit. "Of course you are," she spat, filling her head with impossible ideas, just like always. University was my escape. For 4 years, I lived in a world of clean lines and possibility, of professors who praised my vision instead of crushing it. I graduated summa cum laude, landed an internship at a prestigious firm, and slowly built a career that my parents refused to acknowledge as legitimate. "Playing with computers all day," my father would tell his friends when asked about my job. "Not real work, not like what I did." I was 3 years into my position at Sterling and Lake Design Group when Grandma Marjorie's cancer returned. This time, the doctor said, there would be no remission. I spent every weekend of her last 6 months by her bedside, holding her hand while she told me stories of the art classes she taught, the students who went on to greatness, the dreams she'd deferred for a marriage that ended when my grandfather died young. "I have something for you," she said one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. The hospice room smelled of lavender and antiseptic, a combination that still makes my stomach turn. In my desk drawer, the envelope marked with your name. Inside was a deed, a house in Ellingport, the coastal town where she'd spent summers as a child. 5 bedrooms, 3 baths, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. "It's yours," she said, squeezing my hand with what little strength remained. "Only yours. The will makes that clear." "Grandma, I can't." "You can and you will. It's my grandmother's house. Passed to me, now passed to you, your parents." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They'll receive what they need to find their own way." She died 2 weeks later. On a Tuesday morning while I was in a client meeting, my phone buzzed with my mother's call, and I knew before I answered, the strange thing about expecting death is that it still surprises you when it arrives. The will reading was a study in barely contained fury. My parents sat rigid in their chairs as the lawyer read through Grandma Marjorie's final wishes. The house in Ellingport to me, her art supplies to the local community center, Her personal effects divided among various friends and former students, and to Walter and Helen Whitmore, her son and daughter-in-law, $18,000 and a note. This is for you to find peace elsewhere. The home is Rachel's sanctuary. $18,000. It might as well have been 18 cents for the look on my father's face. This is wrong, he said, standing so quickly his chair toppled backward. I'm her son. That house should be mine. The will is quite clear, the lawyer said, unmoved by my father's outburst. Mrs. Marjorie Whitmore was of sound mind when she executed this document. Sound mind? My mother's laugh was bitter. She left everything to her. The her in question being me, sitting quietly in the corner, still processing the weight of what Grandma Marjorie had done. She'd given me more than a house. She'd given me freedom. I moved to Ellingport the following month. The house was everything I'd dreamed of and more. Shingle-style architecture from the 1920s, lovingly maintained, with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that opened onto a deck facing the ocean. I spent weekends stripping wallpaper and refinishing wood, bringing the house back to its original glory while my career flourished. Sterling and Lake promoted me to senior architect. My salary jumped to 6 figures. I paid the property taxes without blinking, handled every repair myself, and still had enough left over to start a healthy investment portfolio. I was 30 years old and living a life I'd only imagined in those childhood sketches. Which is probably why I made the mistake of feeling guilty. It started with a phone call from my mother. My father had fallen at a construction site, one of the cash-under-the-table jobs he'd taken despite being officially retired. His hip was shattered. They needed somewhere to stay while he recovered. Just for a few weeks, my mother pleaded. You have all those empty rooms. The guilt was like a fishhook in my chest. Despite everything, they were my parents. Despite their coldness, their criticism, their complete inability to see me as anything more than a disappointment, I couldn't turn them away. Just until Dad's back on his feet, I said. Famous last words. The few weeks turned into months. The months turned into a year. What started as a temporary arrangement calcified into permanence, and with each passing day, I watched my sanctuary transform into something else entirely. It began small. Comments about my furniture choices, suggestions about paint colors, my mother rearranging the kitchen cabinets because it made more sense her way, my father taking over the garage for his tools, even though he could barely walk, let alone work. We should update this bathroom, my mother announced one morning, sipping coffee from my grandmother's china. It's so dated. I like it the way it is, I said. Well, when you live somewhere, you should have a say in how it looks. When you live somewhere, as if she was a resident, not a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. They started referring to it as our house in conversation. When the neighbors asked about the beautiful property, my father would launch into stories about our place and how we were thinking of adding a pool. My mother hosted book club meetings in my living room without asking, introducing me to her friends as our daughter who stays here too. I became a ghost in my own home. My design awards disappeared from the mantel, replaced by my mother's collection of ceramic angels. My grandmother's paintings came down, substituted with generic prints from HomeGoods. Piece by piece, they erased me. The financial hints started around year 2. You know, my father said one evening, watching me pay bills at the kitchen table, it's not smart to have all your money tied up in one property. My money's not tied up, I said, not looking up from my laptop. I have investments, savings. Still, he leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. You should think about refinancing. Rates are low. Could pull out some equity. For what? Emergencies. You never know what might come up. The emergency, I would later learn, was their complete lack of retirement planning and my mother's credit card debt that had somehow ballooned to $40,000. We're family, my mother would say whenever I pushed back against their suggestions. Family helps each other. I am helping. You live here rent-free. Rent? My father's face would darken. You want to charge your parents rent? And so it went. A circular argument that always ended with me retreating to my bedroom. the only space in the house that still felt like mine, while they commandeered the rest. I started working late at the office, taking on extra projects just to avoid going home. My colleagues thought I was gunning for partner. Really, I was just trying to remember what it felt like to exist without criticism. "You're becoming a workaholic," my mother observed one rare evening when I was home for dinner. "It's not attractive. No wonder you're still single." "Maybe I'm single by choice," I said. My father snorted. "No one's single by choice at 32. They didn't know about Marcus, the structural engineer I'd been seeing for 6 months. I'd learned not to bring anyone home, not after the disaster with James, who'd made the mistake of complimenting my career at dinner and spent the rest of the evening being interrogated about his intentions and financial status. The breaking point came on a Thursday in October. I'd called my father about a leak under the kitchen sink. I was stuck at the office with a deadline and needed someone to let the plumber in. He answered on the second ring. "Yeah, I'm here," he said. "Where else would I be?" "Thanks, Dad. The plumber should be there around 3. "Fine. Your mother wants to know if you'll be home for dinner." "Probably not. The Harrington project." "Always working," he muttered. "Just like your grandmother. Too good for your family." I was about to hang up when I heard my mother's voice in the background. "Is that Rachel?" "Yeah," my father said, but the way he said it, tired, dismissive, made something in my chest tighten. "Tell her we need to talk about the refinancing," my mother said. "Later," my father replied, and I heard shuffling, like he was setting the phone down. Except he didn't hang up. I almost ended the call myself, but something made me wait. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the universe deciding I needed to hear what came next. Whatever it was, I sat frozen at my desk, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my parents' conversation. "She's not going to refinance," my father said. "Too stubborn." "We'll convince her," my mother replied. "We always do. Remember when she didn't want us to move in? That was different. This is bigger money." "Walter, we need this. The credit cards, your medical bills. We're drowning." "I know that," he snapped. "You think I don't know that?" There was a pause. I heard water running, cabinets opening and closing. "She owes us," my mother said finally. "We raised her." "Raised her?" My father's laugh was bitter. "We tolerated her. There's a difference." "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything. I'm stating facts. She was a burden from day one, too sensitive, too smart for her own good, always thinking she was better than us." "She did think that," my mother agreed. "Still does." "Well, now she can pay for the privilege. That's what she is. A financial backup. Always has been." "We should have contested the will," my mother said. "That house should have been ours." "Can't contest crazy. Marjorie made sure of that with her lawyer tricks." "We could still..." "Still what? We have no legal claim, but we don't need one. Rachel's too weak to kick us out, too guilty. We'll get her to refinance. Say it's for a family emergency, she's too soft to say no." "And if she does?" "She won't. Hell, I'd sell the house behind her back if I could. Cash out, move somewhere warm, let her figure it out." "You can't sell what's not yours," my mother pointed out. "Unfortunately," another bitter laugh. "Marjorie never should have given her anything. She was always our burden, and now we're stuck playing nice to get what we're owed." "Keep your voice down," my mother warned. "If she heard..." "She's at work, like always, hiding from us. She knows what she is." "A burden," my mother agreed. "Always has been." The call ended. I don't know if my father finally noticed the line was active or if the phone simply disconnected, but suddenly I was listening to dead air, sitting at my desk with my whole world tilted off its axis. A burden. The word echoed in my head as I set my phone down with shaking hands. All these years, I'd told myself they loved me in their own way, that their criticism came from a place of concern, that their inability to show affection was generational, cultural, a quirk of personality that didn't reflect their true feelings. But there it was, in their own words. I wasn't their daughter. I was their financial backup, their burden. I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the blueprints for the Harrington project without seeing them. My colleagues filtered out one by one, calling goodbyes that I barely acknowledged. The cleaning crew came and went. Still, I sat. It was past midnight when I finally moved. I pulled up my banking app, checked my balances, savings, investments, the equity in the house, all of it laid out in neat columns, my financial life, which they were planning to dismantle. Then I opened a new browser window and started researching. California property law, tenant rights, eviction procedures, sales of owner-occupied homes. I read until my eyes burned, until the first hints of dawn crept through the office windows. By the time I finally went home, I had a plan. They were asleep when I arrived, the house dark except for the porch light they always left on. Not for me. I realize now, but so the neighbors would think someone cared. I moved through the rooms like a detective at a crime scene, seeing everything with new eyes, the furniture they'd rearranged, the photos they'd replaced, the home they'd claimed as theirs while calling me a burden under its roof. In my bedroom, I pulled out a legal pad and started making lists. What I needed to do, who I needed to contact, how long it would take. They wanted to sell the house behind my back? I'd sell it right in front of them. The next morning, I called in sick to work, the first time in 3 years. My mother seemed surprised to find me in the kitchen when she came down for coffee. "You're home," she said, suspicion creeping into her voice. "Are you ill?" "Just tired," I said, stirring my tea. "Thought I'd take a personal day." "Must be nice," she muttered, reaching for her mug. "Some of us never got personal days." I watched her pour coffee from the machine I'd bought, add cream from the refrigerator I paid to stock, and thought about how easy it had been to let them rewrite history, to let them pretend their presence here was anything other than charity I could no longer afford to give. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice casual, "you and Dad still thinking about that trip to Spain?" Her eyes lit up. "Oh, we've been dreaming about it, but with your father's hip and the expenses—" "I want to pay for it," I said. "Consider it an early Christmas gift." The transformation was instant. Suspicion melted into surprise, then calculation, then greed poorly disguised as gratitude. "Rachel, that's very generous." "You deserve a vacation," I said, the words ashes in my mouth. "Both of you." She was already reaching for her phone, no doubt to tell my father the good news. I excused myself and went to my room, where I'd already pulled up travel sites on my laptop. 2 weeks in Spain, flights, hotels, tours, the works. It would cost me nearly $10,000, but I considered it an investment. $10,000 to get them out of the house long enough to execute my plan. Money well spent. That afternoon, while my mother called her book club friends to brag about her upcoming European vacation, I made my own calls. First, to a lawyer specializing in real estate. Patricia Chen came highly recommended and, more importantly, had no connection to anyone in Ellingport. "Let me make sure I understand," she said after I'd explained the situation. "Your parents have been living with you for 2 years, paying no rent, and have no ownership stake in the property?" "Correct." "And you want to sell the house while they're traveling? Is that legal?" "Perfectly. You're under no obligation to inform house guests of your intent to sell. However," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "this could create significant family conflict." "That ship has sailed," I said. "In that case, I recommend documenting everything. Create an inventory of their belongings, arrange for storage, make sure everything is handled legally and ethically, even if they haven't extended you the same courtesy." Next, I called Genevieve Lang, a real estate agent from 3 towns over. She specialized in discreet sales for high-value properties. "I can have potential buyers lined up within the week," she promised after touring the house. "Properties like this, especially with the ocean view, don't stay on the market long. If you're willing to price it competitively, we could close before the end of the month." "How competitive?" "I'd list at 1.2, expect offers around 1.15. 1.15 million. I thought about my parents planning to refinance my home. to pull equity from walls they'd never paid for, and felt my resolve harden. "Do it," I said. The next 2 weeks required Oscar-worthy performance skills. I helped my parents pack for Spain, drove them to the airport, wished them bon voyage with a smile that felt carved into my face. My mother actually hugged me at the departure gate, the first time in years. "Thank you for this," she said. "Maybe you're not as selfish as we thought." Even in gratitude, she couldn't resist the barb. The moment their plane took off, I transformed into a machine of efficiency. I hired a moving company to pack their belongings, creating a detailed inventory of every item: clothes, toiletries, my mother's ceramic angels, my father's tools, all of it carefully wrapped and labeled. I rented a climate-controlled storage unit in their old neighborhood, paid 4 months in advance, and had everything delivered with a notarized letter explaining the situation. I even included a check for $5,000. Call it severance pay for their 2-year occupation of my life. Genevieve worked her magic with the buyers. Nathan Roth, a tech entrepreneur from Chicago, fell in love with the house on first viewing. "It's exactly what we've been looking for," he said, standing on the deck as the sun set over the Atlantic. Peaceful, private, perfect for starting over. Starting over, I knew the feeling. We closed in record time, cash offer, no contingencies, closing set for 2 days after my parents' scheduled return. I signed the papers with a hand that didn't shake, accepted the check with eyes that didn't water, and handed over the keys to my grandmother's house without a single regret. Because it had stopped being her house the day my parents moved in. They'd stripped it of her memory just as they'd stripped me of my identity, and I was done letting them. I moved into a furnished rental across town, a modest apartment that felt more like home than the house had in 2 years. I changed my phone number, set up mail forwarding, and prepared for the storm I knew was coming. They landed on a Tuesday evening. I knew because I'd tracked their flight, watching the little plane icon cross the Atlantic while I sat in my new living room, a glass of wine in hand and my grandmother's photo on the side table. "They're home," I said to her image. "Let the games begin." The first call came at 9:47 p.m. I let it go to the voicemail I'd never check. Then came the texts, dozens of them, escalating from confusion to panic to rage as they realized what had happened. I'd left them a note, of course, taped to the mailbox they'd claimed as theirs. "Dear Walter and Helen, the burden says, enjoy your vacation memories. The house isn't yours anymore. Rachel." Short, sweet, and to the point. Everything they'd never been with me. The calls continued through the night. I turned off my phone and went to bed, sleeping better than I had in 2 years. For the first time since they'd moved in, I didn't have to worry about morning criticism over coffee or evening interrogations about my life choices. I was free. The legal threats started on day 3. Emails from a lawyer they couldn't afford, demanding explanations, threatening lawsuits, claiming elder abuse and fraud, and a dozen other charges that held no water. Patricia Chen handled them with professional detachment. "They have no case," she assured me. "You were under no legal obligation to house them, and you've handled their belongings with more care than required. The storage unit receipt and inventory prove you didn't dispose of their property. The check shows good faith. They're angry, but anger isn't actionable." Still, I knew a confrontation was inevitable. You can't extract yourself from a parasitic relationship without facing the parasite's rage. So when they finally tracked me down through a mutual acquaintance, my father's former coworker who'd innocently mentioned seeing me at the Harbor Brew Cafe, I was ready. I arrived 15 minutes late, partly for effect and partly because I'd been sitting in my car, practicing what I wanted to say. They were already there, seated at a corner table like conspirators plotting a coup. 2 years of rent-free living hadn't been kind to them. My mother's hair needed touching up, and my father moved stiffly, his hip clearly still bothering him. They looked older, smaller, like the house had been holding them up, and without it they'd deflated. "Rachel," my mother said my name like it was profanity. I sat down, placing my phone on the table between us. "I'm recording this conversation," I said calmly. for both our protection. You can't, my father started. I can and I am. If you're not comfortable with that, I'll leave now. They exchanged glances. My mother nodded slightly. They needed this confrontation as much as I did. How could you? My mother began, tears already forming. We're your parents. Yes, I agreed. You are, and parents are supposed to love their children, not view them as financial backups. We never… October 15th, I interrupted. Dad called about the plumber. He forgot to hang up. I heard everything. The color drained from both their faces. My father's jaw worked silently, processing, calculating. You don't understand, he finally said. Things taken out of context. I was always our burden, I quoted. You'd sell the house behind my back if you could. She's a financial backup, always has been. Did I miss any context there? You were eavesdropping, my mother accused, as if that were the real crime. You were planning to steal my home, I countered. I think that trumps accidental eavesdropping. Steal? My father's voice rose. We're family. Family shares. Family loves, I corrected. Family supports. Family doesn't call their daughter a burden while plotting to refinance her inheritance. You owe us, my mother hissed, abandoning the tears. We raised you. You tolerated me, I said, using my father's own words. There's a difference, remember? The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken truths. Around us, the cafe buzzed with normal conversation, people living normal lives with normal families who didn't view love as a transaction. The storage unit has your belongings, I continued when they didn't speak. 4 months paid. The check should cover security deposits on an apartment. I've fulfilled any obligation I might have had. You sold our home, my father said flatly. I sold my home, I corrected. The one Grandma Marjorie left to me, the one you never contributed a penny toward but felt entitled to claim. We'll sue, my mother threatened. On what grounds? I pulled out the folder Patricia had prepared. Here's the deed. Sole ownership. My name. Here's the record of property taxes. All paid by me. Here's the documentation of repairs and maintenance. All paid by me. Here's your written agreement to a temporary stay, signed by both of you, dated 2 years ago. I spread the papers across the table like tarot cards revealing their future, a future without me as their safety net. You were nothing without us, my father said, his last desperate shot. No, I said, standing up. I was nothing with you, without you. I'm an accomplished architect with a successful career and the freedom to live without being called a burden in my own home. I gathered the papers, leaving copies for them to review. The storage unit address is in there. So is the access code. What you do next is up to you. But it won't involve me. Rachel, my mother called as I turned to leave. You'll regret this. When you're old and alone, you'll regret pushing away the only family you have. I paused at the door, looking back at the 2 people who'd given me life but never love. I'd rather be alone than be somebody's burden, I said. The last I saw of them, they were still sitting at that corner table, the coffee growing cold between them as they realized their financial backup had finally closed her account. I drove to my new apartment, a sleek, modern space with clean lines and an ocean view. Smaller than the house but entirely mine. Every piece of furniture I chose, every color on the walls my decision. No ceramic angels, no criticism, no one calling me a burden while eating food I'd paid for. That evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and my laptop, scrolling through emails from clients. Sterling and Lake had promoted me again. Partner track. They said, my designs were winning awards. My life was expanding in ways it never could have under my parents' roof. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Dinner tomorrow? That new place downtown? I smiled, typing back a yes. He'd been patient these past weeks, understanding when I'd said I needed to handle some family business. Now I could finally tell him it was handled, permanently. The sun set over the water, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the city, My parents were probably settling into a cramped apartment, furious and bitter and blaming everyone but themselves. The thought should have made me sad, but all I felt was relief. I'd been carrying them for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. A week later, a package arrived at my office, no return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting. Inside was a photo, one I hadn't seen in years. My grandmother and me at my college graduation, both of us beaming at the camera. On the back, in my grandmother's careful script, "My brilliant girl, never let them dim your light." There was no note from my mother, but the message was clear. This was her final weapon, aimed at my guilt. "Look what you've destroyed. Look at the family you've thrown away." But all I saw was validation. My grandmother knew. She'd always known what they were, what they thought of me. That's why she'd left me the house, not just as an inheritance, but as an escape route, a way to build a life without being anyone's burden. I framed the photo and placed it on my desk, where I could see it while I worked, a reminder of the woman who'd seen my worth when my parents couldn't or wouldn't. The cease and desist letter went out a month later. After the calls and texts escalated to harassment, Patricia handled it with her usual efficiency, and the silence that followed was profound. No more voicemails about how I'd ruined their lives. No more texts calling me selfish, ungrateful, evil. Just quiet. I filled that quiet with living. I traveled to conferences, presenting my designs to rooms full of peers who respected my work. I taught evening classes at the community college. Architectural autonomy and property ownership for women, sharing what I'd learned about claiming space in a world that often tried to make you small. One of my students, Sarah, stayed after class one evening. "My family wants me to co-sign a loan," she said. "They say it's my duty as the successful one." "What do you think?" I asked. "I think duty and love aren't the same thing," she said slowly. "But it's hard to say no when they raised you." I thought about my parents, probably still in that rental, still bitter, still believing I owed them everything because they'd done the bare minimum. "Raising you was their choice," I told Sarah. "Your success is yours. Don't let anyone, even family, turn your achievements into their entitlement." She left looking thoughtful, and I hoped she'd find the strength to set boundaries before she ended up like me, selling her sanctuary to escape the people who should have celebrated it with her. 6 months after the sale, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. The return label was from a law firm in Brooklinshire. My stomach clenched as I opened it, expecting another legal threat. Instead, it was a notice that my father had filed for bankruptcy. My mother had left him, moving in with her sister in Arizona. The family that had plotted together against me had turned on each other once their common enemy was gone. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, just a hollow acknowledgement that this was always how it would end. They'd needed someone to blame for their failures, and without me, they only had each other. I donated $45,000 to the Marjorie Whitmore Memorial Scholarship that month, funding 2 full rides for young women studying architecture. The thank you letters from the recipients went on my office wall, next to my grandmother's photo. "You're doing so much good," Marcus said, reading one of the letters over my shoulder. We'd been together almost a year now, and he'd never once asked why I didn't speak to my parents. He understood that some bridges were meant to burn. "It's what she would have wanted," I said, meaning my grandmother. "To see potential nurtured instead of crushed." The first anniversary of the house sale approached like a milestone I wasn't sure how to mark. I'd gained so much: freedom, peace, self-respect, but I'd lost something too, even if that something had been toxic. I decided to visit my grandmother's grave. I hadn't been since the funeral, too afraid of running into my parents there. But on a crisp October morning, I drove to Brooklinshire Memorial Gardens with a bouquet of her favorite yellow roses. Her headstone was simple, elegant, like she'd been Marjorie Whitmore, teacher, artist, lightbringer. "Hi, Grandma," I said, arranging the flowers. "I sold the house. I hope you understand." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I could almost hear her voice. "Of course I understand. It was never about the house. Dear one, it was about you having a choice. I sat on the grass, telling her about my promotion, about Marcus, about the scholarship recipients who sent me updates on their progress. I told her about the classes I taught, the boundaries I'd learned to set, the life I'd built without apology. They called me a burden, I said finally. All those years, I thought I was their daughter, but I was just a burden. A red cardinal landed on her headstone, tilting its head at me with bright, curious eyes. Grandma had loved cardinals, called them messengers from the universe. You were never a burden, I said aloud, though I wasn't sure if I was channeling her voice or finally believing it myself. You were a gift they didn't deserve. The cardinal chirped once and flew away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the certainty that I'd done the right thing, the only thing I could have done, and still remained myself. On the way home, I stopped at the Harbor Brew Cafe. The same corner table where I'd last seen my parents was occupied by a young couple, laughing over shared pastries. I ordered my usual and sat by the window, watching the town go about its day. My phone buzzed, an unknown number with a Brooklynshire area code. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Rachel? The voice was hesitant, familiar but aged. It's Mrs. Patterson, from next door to your parents? Mrs. Patterson, I said, remembering the elderly woman who'd lived beside my childhood home for 40 years. How are you? I'm well. Dear, I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. Your father, he's in the hospital. Heart attack this morning. The world tilted slightly. I gripped the phone, waiting for the flood of emotions that should come with such news. Guilt, fear, regret, something. But all I felt was the same hollow distance I'd cultivated for survival. Thank you for telling me, I said. Are you coming? No, I said simply. But thank you for calling. I hung up before she could respond, before the societal pressure to be a good daughter could override my hard-won boundaries. He was in the hospital. If he recovered, it wouldn't be with my forgiveness. If he didn't, I'd already said everything I needed to say. I finished my coffee and drove home to my apartment, where Marcus was cooking dinner and the sunset was painting the ocean gold. He looked up as I entered, read something in my face. You okay? My father's in the hospital, I said. Heart attack. He paused, wooden spoon in hand. Do you need to go? No, I said, and meant it. I need to be here, in my life, the one I built after I stopped being their burden. He nodded, understanding without judgment, and went back to stirring. This was what love looked like, not obligation or guilt or financial entanglement, but choice, the choice to stay, to support, to see someone's worth without calculating their utility. That night, I found the letter in my grandmother's recipe box, the one she'd mentioned all those years ago but I'd never searched for. It was tucked between her apple pie recipe and notes for her famous Christmas cookies, in an envelope yellowed with age. My dearest Rachel, it began in her careful script. If you're reading this, then you've finally discovered what I always knew, that your worth isn't measured by their approval. I left you the house not as a burden, but as a key. Use it however you need. Sell it if it becomes a prison. Keep it if it remains a sanctuary. But whatever you do, don't let them convince you that love requires you to shrink yourself to fit their expectations. They never understood you. My brilliant girl. They saw your light as a threat instead of a gift. But I saw it. I see it still. And if they ever call you a burden, sell the house. That means they've forgotten why I gave it to you. Not to chain you to their needs, but to set you free. All my love, Grandma Marjorie. P.S. There's a bank account number on the back. Pin money I saved over the years. For emergencies or opportunities. Your choice. I turned the paper over. The account information was there, along with a note. For my granddaughter's freedom fund. I laughed through my tears, clutching the letter to my chest. Even from beyond, she was still protecting me, still seeing 3 steps ahead of their manipulation. The account, when I checked, held enough for a down payment on a new place. She'd been saving for decades, squirreling away dollars here and there, building my escape route coin by coin. "You clever woman," I whispered to her photo. "You absolutely brilliant woman." My father survived the heart attack. I know because Mrs. Patterson sent another message, which I deleted unread after seeing the preview. He was alive, and that was all I needed to know. Whether he was well, whether he was angry, whether he still considered me a burden, none of that was my concern anymore. My mother never reached out. Pride, perhaps, or recognition that the bridge was too thoroughly burned to rebuild. Either way, the silence held. A year turned into 2, then 3. I bought a house, smaller than my grandmother's but entirely mine, designed by my own hand and built to my own specifications, a modern marvel of glass and wood, nestled in the hills overlooking the ocean in Carisport, 3 hours from anywhere my past might accidentally intersect with my present. The scholarship fund grew. Former recipients started careers, sent updates, thanked me for chances they might not have had otherwise. I spoke at conferences about sustainable design and financial independence, carefully never mentioning the personal story behind my passion for both. Marcus and I married in a small ceremony on the beach, witnessed by friends who'd become the family I'd chosen, his parents, warm and welcoming, never pushed when I explained my family situation with vague mentions of estrangement. They simply folded me into their lives without question, showing me what parental love could look like when it wasn't conditional. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked on our wedding night, as we sat on our hotel balcony watching the stars. "No," I said, meaning it. "Everything that happened led me here, even the painful parts." "Even selling the house?" "Especially selling the house," I said. "It was never about the property. It was about proving I wasn't what they said I was. I wasn't a burden. I was a person who deserved love without conditions." He squeezed my hand, and we sat in comfortable silence, building our future on the foundation of mutual respect and chosen affection. 5 years after that final confrontation in the cafe, I received an unexpected call, a lawyer from Brooklinshire, informing me that my father had passed. A stroke this time, quick and final. My mother, the lawyer explained, was contesting the will. "What will?" I asked, confused. "He had nothing to leave." "On the contrary," the lawyer said. "He had a life insurance policy, quite substantial. You're named as the sole beneficiary." I nearly dropped the phone. "That's impossible." "The policy is 20 years old," the lawyer continued. "Taken out when you graduated college. He's never missed a payment, even during the bankruptcy." "How much?" I asked, though the amount didn't matter as much as the implication. $200,000. I sat down heavily, processing this information. My father, who'd called me a burden, who'd planned to steal my home, had been paying life insurance premiums for 2 decades with me as the beneficiary. "Your mother is claiming undue influence," the lawyer said. "She believes the policy should rightfully go to her as the surviving spouse." "Of course she does," I murmured. "Will you contest her claim?" I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. "No, let her have it." "Are you certain? The policy is legally yours." "I'm certain," I said. "Consider it my final gift to them, to her." I hung up and called Patricia Chen, asking her to handle the paperwork. Within a week, I'd signed away any claim to the money. My mother could have her Pyrrhic victory. $200,000 wouldn't buy her a relationship with her daughter, wouldn't erase the years of resentment, wouldn't turn back time to when she might have chosen differently. But maybe it would buy her peace, or at least comfort in her old age. "That was generous," Marcus said when I told him. "That was closure," I corrected. "Now there's nothing left between us. No debts, no obligations, no expectations. We're finally, completely done." The news of my father's death spread through my professional network. Small towns talk, even to big cities. And I received condolences I accepted with grace but no grief. How do you mourn someone who never saw you as more than a means to an end? Instead, I increased my donations to the scholarship fund and added a new component: emergency housing assistance for young women estranged from their families. The Marjorie Whitmore Freedom Foundation. providing not just education, but escape routes for those who needed them. "You're building quite a legacy," the foundation director told me at our annual gala. "I'm building what I needed," I said. "What my grandmother provided for me, a chance to be more than someone else's definition of your worth." The night of the gala, I stood at the podium looking out at a room full of supporters, recipients, and believers in second chances. My speech was about architecture, building spaces that nurture rather than confine, but everyone who knew me understood the subtext. "We all deserve structures that support our growth," I said. "Whether those structures are buildings or boundaries, the principle remains the same. A good foundation allows you to reach higher. A weak one will always hold you back, no matter how beautiful the facade." The applause was warm, genuine, nothing like the grudging acknowledgement I'd grown up with. These people saw my success as inspiration, not threat, my achievements as gifts to share, not resources to exploit. After the gala, I found myself back at my grandmother's grave. I visited twice a year now, on her birthday and the anniversary of her death. The headstone was weathered but well maintained. The plot always had fresh flowers from various former students who remembered her kindness. "The foundation's doing well," I told her, arranging my offering of yellow roses. 14 women in safe housing this year, 23 scholarships awarded, your name on buildings at 3 universities. The cemetery was quiet except for distant wind chimes and the occasional bird, peaceful in a way my childhood home had never been. "I saw in the paper that the old house sold again," I continued. "The Roths moved to Europe. It's owned by a young family now, 2 kids. Maybe it'll finally be what it was meant to be, a place where children feel safe and loved." I sat in silence for a while, thinking about cycles and choices, about the difference between what we're given and what we create. "I forgive them," I said finally, surprising myself with the truth of it. "Not for them. They'll never know. And it wouldn't matter if they did. But for me, for the little girl who spent so many years wondering why she wasn't enough, she was enough. She was always enough. They just couldn't see it." A cardinal landed on a nearby branch, bright red against the gray sky. I smiled, taking it as a sign whether it was one or not. "Thank you," I whispered, "for seeing me, for saving me, for teaching me that love shouldn't cost everything you are." The drive home took me through Brooklynshire's downtown, past the house where I'd grown up. I slowed but didn't stop, noting the new paint, the repaired porch, the garden blooming where my mother's ceramic angels used to stand guard. It looked happy, lived in, loved. My phone rang as I pulled back onto the highway. Sarah, my former student, now a successful architect in her own right. "I wanted you to know," she said without preamble. "I didn't co-sign the loan. I set boundaries. My family's not happy, but I'm okay with that." "I'm proud of you," I said, meaning it. "I keep thinking about what you said, about duty and love not being the same thing. It's hard to remember sometimes." "The important things usually are," I agreed, "but you're worth the effort it takes to remember." We talked for a few more minutes about her latest project, her plans for the future, the life she was building on her own terms. After we hung up, I thought about ripples, how one person's choice to value themselves could inspire another, and another, creating waves of change in an ocean of dysfunction. My grandmother had been my ripple. Now I was Sarah's, and someday, Sarah would be someone else's, a chain of women refusing to be burdens in their own stories. The sun was setting by the time I reached home. Marcus had dinner waiting, candles lit, music playing softly in the background. Our ritual after foundation events, quiet celebration of work that mattered, lives that interconnected by choice rather than chance. "How was the cemetery?" he asked, pouring wine. "Peaceful," I said. I told her about the foundation, and I paused, still processing the revelation. "I forgave them, my parents." He studied my face. "How does that feel?" "Free," I said after a moment. "It feels free." We toasted to freedom, to choices, to love that built rather than burdened. Outside, the ocean rolled endless against the shore, and somewhere in the distance, a cardinal sang its evening song. I thought about my father, gone now, and the insurance policy that suggested maybe, somewhere beneath the resentment and manipulation, there had been something resembling care, not enough to change how he'd treated me, but enough to plan for my future even as he'd tried to steal it. I thought about my mother, alone with her windfall, probably still angry, still convinced I'd wronged her by refusing to be the solution to problems I hadn't created. But mostly, I thought about myself, the architect who'd designed her own life, the woman who'd sold a house to find a home, the daughter who'd stopped being a burden the moment she realized she never had been. The candles flickered in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows on the walls I'd built to shelter the life I'd chosen. Strong walls, beautiful walls, walls that welcomed rather than confined. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, watching me with the quiet attention of someone who'd learned to read my silences. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," I said. And for the first time in my life, I meant it completely. No qualifications, no doubts, no voice in the back of my head whispering that I should be more, do more, sacrifice more to earn my place in the world. I was Rachel Whitmore. I was enough. I had always been enough. And that's the end of my story, or at least, the end of that chapter. The burden lifted herself, and in doing so, discovered she'd been carrying wings all along. The house by the ocean still stands, sheltering new dreams and new disappointments. The foundation continues its work, creating possibilities where none existed before, and somewhere, in a rented apartment or a relative's spare room, my mother lives with the consequences of viewing love as a transaction. But that's not my weight to carry anymore. I set it down the day I sold the house, and I've never looked back. After all, you can't fly if you're always looking at the ground, and these days, I spend most of my time soaring,